There are two major developments out of Russia this morning. Moscow has booted out 6 British diplomats and accused them of spying. There's also a new threat from Vladimir Putin to Ukraine's allies. The Russian president is warning them not to allow Kyiv to use longer-range donated weapons like this, the Storm Shadow missile, as it's known. If they do, Vladimir Putin says he will consider them to be at war with Moscow. Our new London correspondent, Crystal Gomansing, has the details.
You're paying close attention to what's coming out of Russia with the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the language that he is using as we see the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer meeting with the U.S. President Joe Biden in Washington. Now, this meeting is all about whether or not NATO allies, particularly the U.S. and the UK, will allow Ukraine to use those long-range weapons to attack on Russian soil. Now, that has become a bit of an issue for Putin, and he is saying that if that happens, if that request is granted, he will see it as NATO's direct involvement. Take a listen to exactly what he had to say.
If this decision is made, it will mean nothing other than direct participation of NATO countries, the United States, European countries, in the war in Ukraine. It is their direct participation, and this, of course, significantly changes the very essence of the conflict. This will mean that NATO countries, the United States, European countries, are fighting with Russia.
Fighting with Russia, those were the Russian president's words there. That is important because it does suggest that he could then take steps against those countries, particularly the UK and the US. Now, there are individuals who are looking at this and saying, listen, we've had this sort of rhetoric from the Russian president. Before any time Ukraine has asked for weapons, there has been this red line, this threat against NATO allies if they move ahead with it. And that is, again, what we're hearing from Peter Ricketts. He is a former head of UK Foreign Office, and he is saying this is meant as a chilling effect.
Of course, Putin is going to try and intimidate Western politicians and publics from taking this step. I mean, my own feeling is, of course, there's a risk. You have to judge that risk, but you have to weigh it against the risk of not acting. And I think that's the greater risk, that we are too cautious in how Ukraine can use the weapons we've supplied. And in the end, Russia comes out on top of this war in whatever settlement is reached.
Obviously, Ukraine sees there to be a need to be able to use these weapons as they see fit in defending their territory. Very much waiting to see what will come of that high-level meeting in Washington.
And the other development I mentioned, Crystal, the expulsion of 6 British embassy staffers from Russia. What led up to the Kremlin making that move?
That is the key question here, because we are just hearing from the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, saying, listen, this move to expel 6 British diplomats has nothing to do with the question of whether or not Ukraine will get permission to use those long-range weapons and hit Russian targets. Russian officials are saying, listen, they have come up with and they've found information that suggests these British diplomats were spying, that they were using information and in a way that would affect Russian security. So they have expelled those 6 officials. So it is yet another thing that is now on the UK Prime Minister's plate. How to deal with that expulsion? Does that, and how does that, affect communication lines between countries? Obviously, they still want to have those diplomatic channels open, but it appears that the 6 are being told to leave. And Russia is warning the UK that they could, if they needed to, look for more information, dig into other diplomats to see if there will be more expulsions. So a number of issues on the plate of Keir Starmer today.